Hello, welcome everybody to this second webinar on data maturity. We had a first webinar with Johnny to talk a bit about why you should care about data maturity in general. That was a very interactive discussion. So this webinar, we're going to dive a little bit more into the content about what do we mean by data maturity in the first place. So maybe let me begin with checking, can everybody hear and see as well? Sound quality okay, video quality, all is good, ready to go? All is good. All right. I see some responses. As usual, we're going to also do a Mentimeter, ask you some questions as well. I'll quickly introduce myself for those of you who don't know me yet. So I'm Chris. I'm the founder and CEO of Data Minded. And I have with me Johnny. Johnny, can you also quickly say hi to the audience and introduce yourself?
Everyone, I'm Johnny Dahlen. I'm a senior data engineer at Data Minded, currently working on a large financial client and also focusing on things like the data maturity index.
Yeah, indeed. So before we dive into the slides, a bit of background. Why did we create this? Actually, it was an initiative of Johnny, so thank you for doing that. But it was really looking into what have we learned across doing implementations at clients, doing data projects, data platforms, analytics systems. So what have we learned, what works, what didn't work, and can we somehow structure that knowledge a bit and share it with the rest of you? So that's why we created a data maturity index in the first place, which is a white paper, if you will. You can download, you can read it. But also we launched a scan that you can take for yourself. You can just answer a few questions, then you get a score on 6 dimensions. Those dimensions we're going to discuss in a bit, to give you an idea. It's not an exact science, but to give you an idea of where you are in terms of data maturity, right? With that context being said, let's dive in. I'm going to share some slides. All right, so a recap of the last event for those of you who weren't there. So we talked about why you should invest in data maturity, and we also gave a very quick, simple definition. So when we talked about data maturity, we said, well, it's about being able to, on a scalable and sustainable way, deliver data products. So there's 2 big words there, scalable and sustainable. Johnny, can you clarify a bit what you mean when you say scalable or sustainable?
Yeah, so scalability is more about the fact that you can grow your products from a very small idea to something internal, to something external, and also to multiple use cases. So it's scaling on multiple things. Also, like your client base, there's many things that you can expand upon, and that's the scalability part. And the sustainability part is mainly keeping that going. Like if you have a success story, keeping that success and taking that to the next level or taking that to a new product.
Yeah, and that's in the end the essence of why you create a data organization in the first place, is because you want to do something with that data. You don't just want to collect it and put it on a data lake. You want to create what they call data products, and that can be a dashboard, that can be just a CSV file, that can be a mobile app, that can be an algorithm, whatever it is. But if you do something with data, you consider it as a product, you offer it to the rest of the organization. That's what we consider to be a data product, right? And,
yeah, exactly.
So to summarize the last webinar, we talked about 5 reasons. It's about the ambitions you have as a company. It's about reaching those ambitions. Data can help you reach those ambitions. Continuous improvement, like everything you do, you should collect feedback on what you're doing with data and then improve on things you're already doing. Creating a competitive advantage. Very often, we gave some examples last time of companies really creating competitive advantage through the use of data. Innovate with data, of course, like rethink how you do products, how you do your products, how you go to market. And finally, it's also a good way to benchmark yourself with the industry, like compared to other retailers or other banks or other telco companies. How am I actually performing? Am I still being competitive, if you will?
And also learning from other industries, like taking best practices and adopting those.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was a very quick recap. You can rewatch the previous webinar if you want to. Let's now dive into the meat of the discussion, is the dimensions of data, or the pillars of data maturity. I give the floor to Johnny to talk a bit about what he means with that.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So last time we also, we indicated already what those 6 dimensions are. We have the organization, we have the product, technology, data, process, and people. And we gave a 1 sentence summary of what those dimensions are. But today, we are going a bit deeper into each of these and why we think they're important and how you can measure your success with each of these dimensions. So what we see there is that we have multiple levels that we classify. So as data-minded, we identified these 6 dimensions, but we want to score an organization based on that. So we have 4 different dimensions: awareness, explore, accelerate, and lead, where we can classify an organization. So how do you measure these things for all the dimensions? Well, basically, indeed, you give a statement that you can agree or not agree, that you can measure an organization, and we have 8 statements for each of the dimensions. If you take the online survey, you can score your own organization, and today we'll select a few of them. We deliberately found a few of them that are quite, well, that resonate with some people, but not with everybody. They're quite controversial sometimes. So today, let's pick out a few of these and discuss them and see why we believe they're actually important.
Yeah, and for people listening, you're going to have time to answer a few questions in the Mentimeter. But in the meantime, if you just want to post some questions in the chat, feel free to do so, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with organization. And
so return on investment of data and machine learning initiatives is clear to the whole organization.
Yeah, and that is controversial because very often companies start with a machine learning initiative just because they think machine learning is cool, but they don't realize, and I wonder how you look at it, but they don't realize, especially the first use case you do, if you're really being honest, the ROI is often negative, right?
Yeah, exactly. It takes a lot of upfront investment. You have the people who need to learn new skills. You may have to acquire new technology, some new infrastructure. There's a lot of learnings going on there. And then we're not even talking about the product itself that goes from an idea to something in production. And the time it takes, it can be a lot longer than you expect.
Yeah, indeed. It can be a year before you get your first use case live. And if you're really being honest about it from a financial point of view, very often the ROI is not there in your first use case, right? And it's a matter of, okay, but now can we scale this across use cases, right? And can we reuse what we built so that the next use case is cheaper and faster, right?
Yeah, indeed. You don't want to fall into the trap that your second use case, you have to repeat everything again.
Yeah.
So we believe that you do need to take some time to, well, let's say, stabilize these foundations. If you build one machine learning use cases and you're doing the next one, there's a lot of things in common, and there's also a lot of learnings. So at some point, you want to take a step back, evaluate what has been going on, and what do we want to have in the future, and measure your results, especially also the cost of the people, because there's a lot of investment going in there, and then make sure you want to scale. A pitfall that we sometimes see is that you just keep going for new cases, but you pile up technical debt. And at some point, the cost will be massive because you have to take care of that technical debt at some point. You have to pay it at some point.
Yeah, indeed. And that's sometimes hard to convey to organizations, that you shouldn't only focus on building the next algorithm, but you should build on, while you're building your use cases, also build out your foundation, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's how you get positive ROI.
Yeah, exactly. So we have 8 different statements for organization, but they actually show you a growth path. Like for the awareness of an organization is aware if they start exploring and experimenting with machine learning and with data. So that's what we classify as aware. And then typically once you do these things, you start realizing also on an organizational level, well, we can do something with that data. We can drive our decisions based on actual facts instead of gut feeling. So the organization becomes a bit more mature, and you also start mapping out the ROI. Then when you have multiple use cases in production, these learnings, they can learn you your specific requirements. If you're building a data platform, you only start learning your requirements after a few of these cases. They will be a bit specific for every company.
And that's okay, by the way, right? Because sometimes companies also make the opposite mistake, I would say. Is like before they do a first few use cases, they invest like crazy in a very complex platform before they've tried to run a single use case. And that's also a pitfall, right?
Indeed. It's important to go to production with something and then take the learnings and then start scaling. Absolutely. But that also reflects on leadership. Typically, when leadership starts seeing the benefits of data and from machine learning, they start picking that up and advocating for it. So if you have a few sponsors at leadership, that really helps in scaling and growing as a company.
Absolutely.
And then, the natural consequences, data trickles down into the strategy of the company. You often see data and machine learning.
Trickles up, I would say.
Yeah, okay, trickles up, indeed. Indeed, it trickles in the strategy. and you see words like data and machine learning, AI, it appears in the strategy and the vision of the company. And that's the point where your leadership of the organization is actually fully aware of what's going on or what you can do with data. And that's the opportunity to start innovating, to build new use cases, and to start scaling as an organization.
Well, you still need to execute on that vision, but having data as a centerpiece in your company strategy is a big step up, right?
Yeah, exactly. So then the next statement that we have is engineers can industrialize a data product end to end.
Yeah, that's also contentions in the sense that when you say that everybody agrees, but then when you talk about the implications, many companies are still organized in very functional ways. So you have your infrastructure people here, then you have some engineers in another group, and then you have a group of data scientists in a lab, then you have business people in a completely different department. None of them can industrialize a data product end to end because you need all 5 of these profiles. So
exactly.
How do you do that then exactly?
Well, to be clear, it's not about like this one golden engineer who can do everything. It's about making sure you have a team, a feature team that can deliver a product, that owns something, that can build it from the idea to putting that in production and beyond. That beyond part is also important because once it's out there, you still want to maintain it, you want to operate it. But that team of people needs to have the right skills in place and also the right abilities and permissions in the company to do that, to act upon that. And that is something when you split your company in like a lasagna way of working, where you have infrastructure, operations, development, and all these layers, it becomes or can become very difficult to move forward.
Yeah, I often compare it to the movie Inception. So I don't know who've seen Inception, but in Inception, whenever you go a level deeper, time slows down. And it's the same with delivering a data project or a data product. Whenever you need another team in your organization, time slows down. So if you need to hand over between 4 different teams, whatever used to take you a day will now take you 6 months, right? And companies don't often realize that enough, like how much you're slowed down by having all these team handovers. So again, having teams that can deliver data products end to end is really key to success, way more than choosing the right technology or the coolest algorithm. If you have a team that can execute, that makes or breaks your success stories, I think.
Exactly, and this is on the 2 ends. This is important. On the business side, you have the time to market, which is often critical, and on the developer side, you also have the ability to execute and the empowerment, which makes people feel more at home and makes them more productive in the end.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when we then zoom out a bit again to the people dimension, we have this first statement like for every manager there should be at least 2 engineers. We can debate about that, of course, but it's basically that you need.
Maybe to add, we have seen projects where there were 2 engineers and 7 managers, right? So we didn't make this up. So there are companies who have that structure.
Indeed. So it's important, according to us, to have the right technical skills in a team as well, so that you can move forward fast, and also to invest in skill building, that you make sure, as we just said, you have the teams with the right skills. It's not about the individual with all the skills. No, it's about the combination you put together to deliver something and to own it. And you also see when you become more mature that teams become data-driven. They start looking at their own data, not about the product they deliver specifically, but also how they work, maybe their velocity or how many bugs they produce. They start becoming aware of that, as well as the managers. Managers start seeing the value in these things as well, and also in, well, the technical parts sometimes. Industrialization is the next step, of course. We talked about that in the statement. But when your team is industrializing and has the full ownership, you also often see continuous improvement. That's a cultural thing. You want to become faster and better, and you want to start automating things because that's the only way to go faster in the end. And at some point, your team members, they will become leaders themselves. Maybe on a technical level, we see like people who become very mature and start speaking at conferences and start spreading beyond the company. And that's when you know you have really good people in your company, I think.
Indeed.
And on an organizational level with people, you see them collaborating across more teams. A topic we call data mesh, but we will dive into that a bit more in a moment.
Indeed. Yeah.
So continuous deployment to production multiple times a day. This is part of the process dimension.
Yeah, indeed. And this is contentious because we see a lot of organizations that just tell us, look, our last release was horrible. We had outages in production. We need to roll back. We need to it was a terrible experience. So this time, actually, we're not going to go faster to production, like definitely not multiple times a day. And we're going to do the reverse. We're going to put some more processes in place, some more checks, so that we know for sure that the next time we release to production, it's actually going to be a stable release. So, but you say the opposite here, like multiple times, continuous deployment. How does that fit together?
Yeah. It's a natural response, I think. When you want to increase quality, you want to make sure you spend enough time testing it, but at the same time, when you spend more time, more changes will be bundled together, and they will interact with one another and maybe cause new bugs that you didn't foresee. So the more changes you put together and the longer you wait, the more risk you have, which actually decreases your quality, which is the inverse that you want to reach. So we propose, and that's something that is not well known in software engineering practices.
We didn't invent it.
No, indeed, it's not our invention. So we propose to do more deployments, maybe not 20 per day. This really depends on your organization, but you should be able to quickly shift gears when it's needed. When there is a critical bug, you should be able to quickly deploy with confidence, and that's the important part. There should be a procedure in place, automated preferably, that you're confident with a new release and that you can shift gears very quickly.
Absolutely. And there the comparison I like to make is like, compare this like a stream of water. If you do big batches, big releases at once, then you have a very big stream of water with a lot of water flowing through your river, right? Yeah. With a lot of things that can go wrong as well. But then if you reduce your batch sizes, that's actually like lowering the water level in your stream. And then you will see, if you lower the water level, that there will be some rocks and some sticks and whatever blocking your flow. You don't see it if you do big batches, but if you do smaller batches, you start seeing those rocks. And then it's up to you to first take away those impediments that hinder you from having that velocity. And then once those rocks are removed, then you again lower the water level. So that means even smaller features that you ship to production, and smaller until the end goal should be what they call single unit flow, right? So that you have a single idea or single bug fix or whatever you can bring from development to production automatically, if you want, continuously. It takes time and effort, it takes hard work, but that's I think that's the way forward. Indeed, what I said earlier, like, because we had so many issues, let's put some more process in place or some more boundaries in place. That's only going to slow you down, right? It's the opposite that you need to do.
Exactly. And it's ultimately about the quality that you're delivering.
Exactly, yeah.
So when we look at the full process dimension again, you see like teams that are beginning with the process maturing, they start focusing on testing, giving feedback to one another, reducing work in progress so that you don't have a lot of balls in the air. And also code reviews, which is a form of feedback, like making sure the quality increases. You'll notice that everything in this process dimension is ultimately about quality and about confidence.
Yeah.
So once you go beyond the awareness phase, you see that you focus on internal CI/CD, for example, where you notice that, okay, we're dragging zip files to this server to deploy. That's not really helping in my flow. That's not really giving a lot of confidence. You automate that. The same thing for security. Checking your dependencies every day, you automate that using a tool like Dependabot, for example. So you use like basic tooling to get your flow going. And also, then the next phase is about testing. Shifting left on testing means basically detecting bugs as far away from the end user as possible, as early in your development process as possible. This is something well known in software engineering. This holds for anything to do with code, in my opinion. And also test data. When you log into an environment, you want to test a bug fix, and you have to scrape some data from one environment, put it in another one. That does not help your flow. You quickly realize that when it's a hot situation where something is going on, you need to have reliable test data. And then the leading organizations, what we see there is security. It's not just simple tools anymore. It's part of the full process of development. You start thinking about threat analysis of data pipelines, for example, early in the process. Where can somebody inject data to mess up with my pipelines? Yeah. These are things that you can see appearing in leading organizations, as well as what we just discussed, daily deployments to production.
And this is all, I mean, to be clear, this is all easy to put on slides. This is very hard in reality. We see a lot of companies struggling with this process that I mentioned. And I hope it's clear when we say process, we don't mean like, do you do all the Scrum ceremony or are you fully agile? No. The process is really very technical automation processes, if you will.
Exactly.
Super important. Hard to do, but super important.
Exactly. With the goal of increasing the quality and increasing how your product looks in the end.
Exactly.
So the next statement is about the product I mentioned. Less than 15% of changes to production leads to failures.
So, well, coming back to your previous statement,
Yeah.
15% isn't that a bit much? Shouldn't we be way more ambitious here?
Yeah, that sounds a bit much. I'm going to talk about where we got this from. This is not, again, something we invented. This is something we got from the book called Accelerate, which is a team that also publishes the state of DevOps.
Yeah.
It's basically a metric of how good you score in terms of DevOps, also a form of maturity. And they score the elite organizations at this amount, 15% of changes leads to failures.
Yeah.
This is a maximum, by the way, so it's not a minimum. But basically this means you want to find a balance between not deploying to production and not increasing your risk, which ultimately also increases your risk because you're just leaving it there and you're not doing anything, and still providing some room for people to do changes with minimal failures. Also, what is important here is the impact of the failures. If you have the ability to shift gears quickly, to deploy multiple times a day, you minimize the impact of that failure. And that's the thing that is not included in this quote, but is ultimately the important part. If you have an impact of pulling down entirely production, or maybe a fraud detection process that goes down for half a day, the impact might be huge.
Yeah.
If you have an internal dashboard that goes down for an hour, maybe nobody cares.
Indeed.
So it's about understanding that balance.
And it's a risk trade-off that you're making.
Exactly, yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
So when we look at the product, typically you start worrying about the health of your product. How good is my product? Is it still doing what it's supposed to do? Are my APIs working?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Is it alive?
Yeah, is it alive indeed? And also, can we fix things by reprocessing data? If you're talking about data pipelines, you may want to reprocess some of the data. And then you quickly move on to high availability. You want to have your service or your API or your pipeline running whenever possible, always, essentially, which is not always possible. And you also have a disaster recovery plan. What if things go wrong, that you have like a procedure to follow, maybe for people who are on call, so that they know what to do. And that always evolves into data products that are internal. Like when you have a mature product and people start using it, it's a data product. And then you get to the level where you want to have some guarantees. That starts out with a service level indicator. Oh, we're going to measure how many DAGs we run every day, how many batch jobs do we run every day. Then you're going to make that an objective. How many failures are there every day?
Yep.
And then that translates into an agreement with a client, the SLA. So that's typically an evolution you can follow from service level indicator to service level agreement.
Yeah, and again, not day one, right? Day one, just try to get it live, monitor the health of your product. But then as you grow in maturity, you should look into these components.
That's a very good point. This is all about evolution and starting somewhere. You cannot reach the leadership level at day one. And then finally, we discussed about the 15% failure rate. And also the next step is to externalize data products. If they're very mature, you can open them up to the world.
All right. Then we switch to technology.
Yeah, so for technology, we prefer industrialized workloads over ad hoc scripts.
Yeah, this is again a statement that everybody will agree with on the surface. Like, yes, I prefer it, but are you actually doing it? Because what we see a lot in organizations is my ad hoc script is actually working. It's good enough. So why shouldn't I invest my time in the next feature? Why do I have to industrialize this script?
Yeah, so basically it's about scalability here and also about the guarantees you can provide. If you have a notebook that is running on your local machine, relying on a specific GPU you have in there, that's not really scalable. But there, key is, again, balance. You have to decide when is it ideal or up to which degree do I want to industrialize this.
Yeah.
Maybe for an internal process, it's good enough to have a bash script and a cron job. For something that you rely on heavily, you want to have that somewhere in the cloud, maybe.
And you need both, to be clear. You can't also, the opposite is also bad, that whenever you want to test out an idea, you have to go through a very strict DevOps process. Like, no.
Exactly.
Like, so organizations ideally go through a phase of exploration, experimentation, and they try out 20 small things. And then once they see something's working, they latch onto it. But then don't forget to, like, that one thing that is working, also go deep, right?
Yep.
Make sure that you industrialize it. It becomes a part of your IT assets, right? Yeah.
Indeed. And also for technology, you typically start with exploration, as you said, cloud exploration, for example, and you have an intention to migrate maybe to the cloud. Then you start looking at an industrialization process and finding that balance, as we discussed, and moving more to, well, rigid processes in the sense of code. You want to put as much as code as possible because that is deterministic, that is reliable. So you see infrastructure as code and everything as code approaches. And also build versus buy decisions start playing a role. Am I going to invest in building it myself? Is that key to the company? Or am I going to take something off the shelf and just reuse it? So ultimately you lead to cloud innovation following this process.
All right, so finally we end up with the data. And there the quote is, data mesh ideas are implemented successfully.
Yeah, so data mesh, that's a topic that comes up quite often to me. It's also sometimes still a bit vague what different people mean with data mesh. So maybe because you can provide a bit of clarity on that.
I'm definitely, you say, nobody is an expert on this because it's so young, but I can explain how I look at data mesh. Is what we see, companies are becoming moderately successful with data. Let's call it like that. They have the technology, they have the people, they have the organization, they have the use cases. So they have their first use cases live. What they see now is that their own data organization, they themselves are starting to become the bottleneck. And that is only logical because all of a sudden, like 10 different departments want to get their use cases done, all with you. But you don't have the domain knowledge that they have, you don't have the time that they have, you miss a lot of context about the project. So for you as an engineer, you're always squeezed between like 10 different domains that you have to spend a lot of time learning on, and you're always the bottleneck in that flow. So ideally, instead of them coming to you for work, you should enable them, you should enable the rest of the organization to do everything self-service in a domain-oriented way. Well, there's a whole paper written about that, but you should focus that let's say the sales team can run their own sales analytics, and the marketing team can run their own marketing analytics, and the operation team can do their own whatever predictive maintenance projects they want to do. And then the role of your data organization changes. It doesn't just become like the data pipeline builders anymore. No, we are here to enable the rest of the organization. We give you self-service tooling. We make sure governance is in place so that you can build your own use cases. That in the end is for me the next step in many organizations. Only then you really democratize data. Then you scale out. You're not just one team being effective with data. You also don't have an emailing department that does all emails. So then you also don't just have a data department that does all data analytics. In the end, it doesn't make sense. Everybody should do data. Right?
So you have like these two levels. Some part is centralized and the rest is distributed.
Exactly. And you need the two, because completely distributed, then you just get 10 silos and you're not winning anything. So you need to find a balance of what do you still do centrally and what can you give to the business teams. Right?
And how do you then make sure that you can still adopt new technology, for example?
Yeah, that's a difficult one because ideally, from an IT point of view, you want to standardize. So black and white, you say, we do everything in Python. And I don't care if you have an R project or a DBT project, no, we do everything in Python, bam. That makes it easier for you to govern, but of course that hinders innovation. So you should allow for some teams, when they want to use other technologies, it should be okay. On the other hand, you also don't want to end up with 10 teams with 10 completely different technology stacks. Because then super hard to hire people, super hard to train people. I mean, super hard to maintain all these pipelines. So again, the two extremes is not good. You should allow for some innovation, but you can't just be the cool guy and allow every technology because somebody has seen a nice demo of it. So that doesn't work in an enterprise context.
Okay, so for data, we see a full journey in different companies. So typically it starts with very low-key things like data cleaning and making sure data does not get deleted. That evolves into access management, making sure sensitive data is also blocked. And then you start scaling. More pipelines, maybe streaming, and you see the need for a data catalog that people can discover things, becomes more self-serviceable, and then indeed we end up at the data mesh scenario.
Yeah, all right. So maybe...
Very quickly, basically we see 3 dimensions on one side, organization, process, and people. That's more of the business side of the maturity. And on the technical side, we see the tools, the product, and the data, more on the technical part. And with the data maturity index, we want to make sure conversations are enabled by measuring all of them and making sure there is discussion and awareness in all of the roles in the company.
Yeah, indeed. With that, I see we're running out of time, but stick with us if you don't have to go to your next meeting. We still have a few questions for you to ask, and then some deep dive into the data maturity index itself. But let's start with the questions, because I feel like we've been talking way too long already. I'm going to send you here on the chat a link to the Mentimeter. So if you go to the link I sent, menti.com, and then that, those thingies. I'll ask a few questions again. The first one is, and I'll share my screen while we do this, is to prioritize the dimensions that or the pillars that we just discussed for your company. So I'm curious, so we talked about indeed the three organizational ones: organization, people, process, and then the more technical product, technology, data. I see, can't type. So I'm curious here, all of these are obviously important, but for you, what do you think you need to put the most emphasis on? What do you think is the most important for your company? Okay, so product, I like it, the product is first, well, at least for now, because in the end, without a product, you have no value to bring, and your initiative will die sooner or later.
Ultimately, all of this is about the product, right?
Indeed.
Delivering a high quality product that is sustainable and scalable.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit dangerous that process is so low, because we see companies struggling with process a lot, right?
That people is quite high. I do really like that.
Yeah, it's hard to, I'm thinking now, what would I push up or down? It's difficult to,
But it turns out data is quite low.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it all starts with having data available, right? If you don't have data available, there's no use cases to build. So yeah, but you have to make choices. Anyway, while these are coming in, I think this gives you some idea that actually product, people, process, In the end, it's all about shipping a use case. I think that's the conclusion we can get out of this. Maybe the next one, sort of the question earlier was about importance, but now here in real life, what are you struggling with the most? And now, again, we give you the 6 boxes: organization, people, process, product, technology, data. And I see the strongly disagree, strongly agree is still there, but so are you struggling very much with organization, then you put it in strongly agree? Are you not struggling with organization at all? You put strongly disagree. Okay, so, well, again, there's only 2 answers yet. But let's see what comes in. People are struggling with process.
And organization as well.
Yeah, no, it's moving left now. Yeah. Organization is moving, well, yeah, it's a sample, but product as well.
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult to really give a clear definition of what your product is. If you think about the data mesh definition, your product is the data, the infrastructure, and the code all together.
Yeah.
And that's something you offer externally. While sometimes people just look at the final layer or the CSV file you talked about as the product.
But there, I do think we've seen both scenarios. We've worked with companies where their first use case was spot on, and we helped them industrialize that use case, but mainly the value was in the use case that they already had, and that use case alone returned millions. And then if your first use case can bring millions to the business, everything is possible, right? You can invest in technology, you can invest in people, you can, it will become a priority for your organization. While on the other hand, we also see sometimes a struggling with product, as in, it's a nice use case, it's good to demo, but really it's not affecting the bottom or top line. It's super important. Your first use cases have to be spot on. You have to deliver immediate business impact. It's super important. We see a mix. So some people very bipolar. Some are really struggling with their organization. Others are no. I think it's really do you have a plan or do you not have a plan, right? So some of you have a plan, some of you don't. People is also very distributed. Okay. Process is clear that most of you are struggling with that. Yeah, that's also what we see in the survey so far. Yeah. Technology, not so much. Product, that's what we just discussed. Can I get a first good use case? Yes or no?
I think it's a good sign that technology is very low.
Yeah.
That's also something we see. Getting technology is not the challenge.
It's there, right? You can take it off. There's so many things you can take off the shelf. We've almost never seen a project where the bottleneck was the technology. I mean, we also always have challenges with technology, or things you need to refactor or whatever, but it's there in the end.
Yeah.
It's a solved problem. Yeah. All right. Then maybe I'm going to leave this Ask Us Anything question open. So if you have some questions for us, post it here. In the meantime, we're going to go over the final slides that we prepared, but feel free to stop sharing, to post some questions there. We're going to go over that once we did the final thing here. So we want to talk a little bit about the data maturity index. Johnny, can you talk a bit about what we've done there?
Yeah, so we've launched a small survey, which is in the URL at the bottom of the slide.
Yeah.
When you fill in that survey, you get a top-level view of your data maturity. It's a very quick assessment. But if you want to learn more, in the data maturity index, there is a light version and an extended version where we discuss all of these dimensions in detail and sub-dimensions as well, where you can get inspiration on how to improve your company. So if you have done like the basic scan, you will need to know where to zoom in on with your company. This should give you like a path towards a better organization.
Yeah, and of course, this is a starting point. So if you want to really dive deep into how can I increase my data maturity, then definitely get in touch. We'll, of course, be happy to help you with that. Right? Yeah. We also have a next webinar. This is the final webinar in this series. So we talked a bit about the why previously. Now we dove into all the specific topics. But then we are going to talk about data maturity in practice. And in fact, it's still a small secret, but we're going to have a special guest with us, somebody who's done this in the past, who's lived through this, the good and the bad, and he's also very open to share what worked and didn't work. So he's going to share his journey, his learnings, and there's going to be an interview with that secret guest. You can register. It's the May 17th, 12:30 again. You can register here. Data maturity in practice, tiny URL, data maturity in practice. With that, I'm going to switch back to Q&A and see if there's some. This was the last slide, right, Johnny? Yeah, this was the last slide. See if there's some questions from the audience. So far, nothing. I'll share my screen again so you see questions coming in. Yeah, share screen. Boom. All right. Yeah. So here we go. It's the same Mentimeter. If you have questions or remarks, go to menti.com. While we wait for questions, maybe Johnny, can you talk a bit about what was your experience? One thing I really wondered actually is how you got to the 6 pillars in the end, because I know you had a lot of conversations with a lot of team members, but how do you got to those 6 dimensions?
That's a good question. I think we talked about everyone with everyone at Data Minded, and we got like, I think, more than 100 things we can measure. Obviously, that's not a good thing to approach like that. So we clustered all of this information, and basically these were the clusters that came out of there, the different topics. Inside every topic, we have like these sub dimensions still, and different teams that we also discuss in the data maturity index. But that's how it came in.
Yeah. And to be honest, I mean, they're spot on, but they're also nothing shocking, right? You see that in data, but you also see that in other processes you have in the company, other business objectives. You always come back to these dimensions, if you will. Yeah.
The one that is maybe a bit unique here is the data part, which you will notice aligns a lot with data governance as well, because that's of course where we focus on.
Yeah, indeed. With that, I think there was no questions from you. Somebody's looking forward to the special guest, Elon Musk. Me too. I hope this was useful. I always say if there's no question, then either everything was clear or nothing was clear. So,
I hope we're somewhere in the middle.
So I hope everything was clear. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you again in 2 weeks, and thanks for joining this webinar. All right, take care. Bye. Stop.